This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome. Have you ever wondered why 90% of the world is right-handed? While most animals are balanced, humans are a total statistical outlier. Today, we're diving into the deep history of this 90/10ths enigma. We'll explore how walking upright, the growth of our brains, and even the lethal geometry of ancient combat shaped our species. From 2-million-year-old dental records to the strategic survival of the left-handed minority, join us as we uncover the fascinating evolutionary journey that built our lopsided world. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The 90/10ths Enigma. If you are holding a device to watch this or scrolling through a screen right now, there is a 9 in 10 chance you are using your right hand. This simple, everyday preference is so common that we rarely stop to consider how strange it actually is. Across every corner of the globe, in every culture ever studied, and throughout every era of recorded history, approximately 90% of the human population favors the right hand. This lopsided ratio is a biological constant that transcends geography, language, and social structure. It is one of the most striking and enduring traits of our species, yet for decades it has remained one of the most baffling mysteries in evolutionary science. To understand why this is so peculiar, we have to look beyond our own species and realize that, in the grand theater of animal life, humans are a complete statistical outlier. In the broader animal kingdom, bilateral symmetry is the gold standard. Most creatures are built with two roughly identical halves, a design that has worked for over 500 million years. For a freely moving animal, the world is essentially indifferent to left and right. Predators can come from either side, and food can be found in any direction. Consequently, most vertebrates show a 50-50 split in limb preference at the population level. While an individual cat might favor its left paw, or a specific parrot might consistently use its right foot to grasp a piece of fruit, the population as a whole usually balances out. There is no right-handed majority among chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, when they are in their natural habitat. Individual apes develop their own personal preferences, but as a group, they are roughly half and half. Humans, however, broke this mold entirely. We didn't just develop a slight lean, we shifted so violently to one side that left-handedness became a permanent, small minority. This 90/10ths split is what scientists call a population-level bias, and it represents an evolutionary singularity. The question is not just why we prefer one hand, but why we almost all prefer the same hand. This isn't just a matter of habit or cultural training. We see the evidence of this bias written into our very bones and even into the tools left behind by our most distant ancestors. Archaeologists have looked at stone tools dating back over 2.5 million years, long before the first modern humans ever walked the earth. By analyzing the way these ancient flint tools were flaked and chipped, researchers can determine the direction of the strikes used to create them. The findings suggest that even the early makers of these tools were predominantly right-handed. The evidence becomes even more evocative when we look at the artistic record left by prehistoric people. In caves like the Cueva de las Manos in Argentina, there are hundreds of stenciled handprints on the walls. To create these, an artist would place one hand against the stone and blow pigment through a tube with the other. Over 90% of these stenciled outlines are of left hands, which tells us that the artists were holding the pigment blowing tool in their dominant right hands. This consistency suggests that the biological foundation for our right-handed world was already firmly in place tens of thousands of years ago. Perhaps the most ingenious way scientists have tracked this trait is by looking at ancient teeth. Our ancestors often used their mouths as a third hand. Imagine a prehistoric hunter holding a piece of animal hide or a tough strip of meat between their teeth, pulling it tight with one hand while using a sharp stone tool to scrape or cut it with the other. Every so often, that stone tool would slip and leave a tiny scratch or striation on the front of the teeth. These scratches are like a fossilized record of a person's movements. If the person was right-handed, the scratches would slant from the upper left to the lower right. If they were left-handed, the slant would be the opposite. When researchers examined the teeth of Neanderthals and even earlier hominins like Homo habilis, they found the exact same 90/10 ratio we see in modern humans. This means that for at least 1.8 million years, our lineage has been overwhelmingly right-handed. This preference is so deeply ingrained that it begins long before a child ever picks up a crayon or a spoon. Ultrasound technology has allowed us to peek into the womb and observe the movements of fetuses as early as the 8th to 10th week of pregnancy. Most fetuses show a clear preference for moving the right arm more than the left, and by the 15th week, the vast majority are consistently sucking their right thumb. This suggests that handedness is not something we learn from our parents or our environment, but rather a default setting of our biological development. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that this was all controlled by the brain. We know that the human brain is divided into two hemispheres, and because the nerves cross over, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body. The left hemisphere is also where most people process language. Because both language and complex tool use require high-level motor control and sequential planning, it was thought that the brain simply clustered these functions together in the left hemisphere for maximum efficiency. This division of labor makes the brain a more powerful processing engine, but it also tethers our most skilled movements to the right hand. However, recent breakthroughs have challenged the idea that the brain is the sole architect of this trait. Some research suggests that the preference might actually originate in the spinal cord. During the early stages of development in the womb, the motor cortex of the brain and the spinal cord are not yet connected, but the fetus is already showing a hand preference. This points toward epigenetics, the way certain genes are turned on or off by environmental factors in the womb as a potential driver. It seems that gene activity in the spinal cord is asymmetrical from the start, setting the stage for the brain to later follow suit. Despite the clear biological roots, the human experience of handedness has been heavily layered with cultural meaning. Because left-handers are a minority, they have historically been viewed with suspicion or even seen as an omen of bad luck. The very language we use reflects this bias. The word sinister comes from the Latin word for left, while dexterous comes from the word for right. In many societies, the right hand is associated with correctness, law, and cleanliness, while the left is relegated to the unclean or the taboo. For generations, left-handed children were forced, often through punishment or restraint, to switch to their right hands. This social pressure was so intense that it likely masked the true number of natural left-handers for centuries. Yet even in the most permissive modern societies where this pressure has vanished, the 10% minority remains stable. This stability is a clue that being left-handed isn't just a random error in development. If it were a disadvantage, natural selection would have likely phased it out over millions of years. Instead, it persists as a constant, small slice of the population. This suggests that there is a balance at play, a reason why evolution has kept a few rebels in the mix. Left-handers often have an advantage in interactive sports like boxing, fencing, or tennis, simply because their movements are less familiar to a majority that is used to training against right-handers. This surprise factor may have been a life-saving advantage in the hand-to-hand combat of our ancestors, allowing left-handedness to survive as a successful, albeit rare, strategy. But while the persistence of the minority is fascinating, it doesn't explain the overwhelming dominance of the majority. Why did we move away from the 50-50 split of other primates? Why did our ancestors decide, in a sense, to put almost all their eggs in the right-handed basket? If most animals benefit from being symmetrical and unpredictable, humans must have gained something truly monumental by becoming lopsided. This shift wasn't just a fluke of history. It was likely a necessary byproduct of the very things that made us human in the first place. When we compare ourselves to other species, we see that hand preference is often linked to task complexity. A chimpanzee might use either hand to pick up a piece of fruit, but when it comes to using a stick to fish for termites, a task requiring more precision, they show a stronger individual preference. Humans, however, took task complexity to a level no other animal has ever reached. We didn't just use tools, we made them, refined them, and passed the knowledge of how to use them down through generations. This required a level of neural specialization that may have forced our ancestors to choose a side. But even this doesn't fully answer the question. If we needed to specialize, why didn't we end up with half the world being right-handed and the other half being left-handed? Why the universal bias? To find the answer, we have to look at the unique path our evolution took. We have to consider the moment our ancestors stood up and looked out over the savanna, and the massive growth of the brain that followed. These two milestones, the way we move and the way we think, may be the twin engines that drove our species toward its right-handed destiny. If we can understand how standing on two legs changed the way our hands interacted with the world, we might finally solve the riddle of why we are the only species to have built a world that is so decisively right-aligned. What was it about that early transition to upright walking that tipped the scales? To understand why 90% of us reach for a tool with our right hand, we have to go back to the moment our ancestors stopped being generalists and started being specialists. For a long time, researchers looked at handedness as a standalone trait, something that perhaps just happened to us as we became smarter. But recent scientific efforts have shifted the perspective, suggesting that our right-handedness is actually the mathematical and biological result of two massive evolutionary shifts. It is the story of how we moved and how we thought, and how those two things worked in tandem to rewire the human experience. To find the roots of this lopsidedness, we must first look at the primate norm. A groundbreaking study recently sought to crack this mystery by looking at our extended family tree, analyzing over 2,000 individual primates across 41 different species. When researchers ran the data, humans looked like a total anomaly. On a scale called the Mean Handedness Index, or MHI, where a score of 0 means a population is perfectly balanced between left and right, and a score of 1 means everyone is right-handed, most primates clustered near the 0 mark. They showed little to no consistent population-wide preference. Humans, however, sat way out on the edge with a score of 0.76. We were the weird ones, the outliers that didn't fit the curve. But then, the researchers added two specific variables into their evolutionary models: brain size and a measurement called the intermembral index. This index is a simple ratio of arm length to leg length, and in the world of anthropology, it is the smoking gun for how an animal moves. Humans have a low intermembral index, meaning our legs are significantly longer than our arms, a clear adaptation for walking on two legs. Great apes, by contrast, have high indices, with long arms designed for swinging through the canopy. Once these two factors were accounted for, the human anomaly vanished. Statistically speaking, we stopped being an evolutionary oddity and started looking like the logical conclusion of a very specific path. The message was clear. If you are a primate that walks on two legs and possesses a massive, complex brain, you are almost destined to be right-handed. This evolution followed a distinct two-stage process that distinguishes between the strength of handedness and the direction of handedness. The first stage is defined by the strength of individual preference, measured by the Modified Absolute Binomial Strength Index, or MABSI. This is where our tree-dwelling cousins provide a surprising lesson. Contrary to the idea that they are simply symmetrical, many arboreal primates actually show stronger individual hand preferences than terrestrial ones. If you are a primate living in the canopy, your life depends on both hands being equally capable for locomotion. But when it comes to feeding, you need to be a specialist. A missed grab while swinging could be fatal, so symmetry is a survival strategy for movement. However, for tasks like extracting insects or picking fruit, these primates often develop a very strong favorite hand. They are individually specialized but population-level balanced. The first catalyst in the human story was bipedalism, which took this existing primate tendency for individual hand strength and amplified it. When our ancestors moved out of the trees and onto the ground, the job description for our hands changed forever. Walking on two legs freed the arms from the burden of carrying our body weight. For the first time in millions of years, the hands were unemployed during travel. This freedom created an evolutionary opening where the hands could be used for carrying food, holding infants, and manipulating the world. This shift toward walking upright likely increased the MABSH, the sheer strength of our hand preference, early in our lineage. Early hominins like the Australopithecines, who lived between 2 and 4 million years ago, were already committed walkers, but still possessed relatively small brains. Consequently, they likely showed a very strong preference for using one hand over the other, but they hadn't yet tipped into a 9/10 population-wide right-handed bias. The second catalyst was encephalization, or the massive expansion of the brain. While bipedalism provided the opportunity for specialization, it was the growing brain that locked in the direction of that preference. As the genus Homo emerged and the brain began to grow in size and complexity, the mean handedness index began its dramatic climb toward 0.76. This shift was driven by the brain's need for efficiency. As the left hemisphere became the primary hub for fine motor control and sequential processing, the right hand became the natural choice for executing complex tasks. While the epigenetic and spinal cord triggers mentioned in earlier chapters may have provided the biological spark, it was the sheer scale of brain expansion that acted as the engine, driving the population toward a single, unified direction. This locking in of the trait is governed by a complex genetic mechanism, often described as the D and C gene theory. In this model, the D allele is the dextral gene, which biases the developing brain toward the right hand. The C allele, however, is a chance gene. When the C gene is present, it essentially bypasses the brain's default right-handed setting, leaving the individual's handedness to be determined by random chance. This explains why left-handedness persists as a stable minority. It is the result of a biological wild card that allows the brain to deviate from the standard right-aligned blueprint. The species often nicknamed the hobbit, or Homo floresiensis, serves as the perfect confirmation of this dual catalyst theory. This small-bodied hominin lived on the island of Flores in Indonesia and possessed a very small brain, only about a third the size of a modern human's. Furthermore, its body retained ancient traits, including an intermembral index and foot structure that suggested it was still adept at climbing. When researchers applied their models to the hobbit, they found it didn't follow the typical human trend toward extreme right-handedness. Because the hobbit lacked both a massive brain and a body fully specialized for bipedalism, it never developed the lopsidedness seen in its larger-brained relatives. It was a bridge back to an older way of being, a reminder that our handedness is a byproduct of these two specific evolutionary pressures working in tandem. This specialization gave our ancestors a massive edge through the power of social learning. Humans are a deeply imitative species, and by delegating complex tasks to one dominant hand, we made the transmission of culture and technology much more efficient. If everyone in a group is using the same hand to demonstrate how to sharpen a tool or process food, the younger members of the group can mirror those movements more accurately. In a world where survival depended on the collective knowledge of the tribe, this consistency was a powerful tool for cultural evolution. It allowed for a level of standardization that made the learning of complex, multi-step skills faster and more precise. This two-stage process explains why humans are so unique compared to other bipedal or precise animals. Kangaroos are bipedal and show a population-level preference for their left limbs, but they lack the massive lateralized brain of a human. Parrots use their feet to manipulate food with incredible precision, but they aren't using those limbs for locomotion in the same way we do. Humans are the only species where the total liberation of the hands combined with a massive neurological reorganization to create a world that is 90% right-aligned. But this raises a deeper question about the nature of that dominance. We know that this wasn't just a mental preference, it was a physical transformation that affected our muscles, our bones, and even our skeletal remains. If the brain and the legs provided the map for our right-handed destiny, where can we find the first physical footprints of that journey in the deep past? To find the most ancient and undeniable proof of this journey, we have to look at the parts of the body that survive long after everything else has turned to dust.
Chapter 3. The Dental Diary of the Handyman.
When we think of the evidence for human evolution, we usually imagine the grand milestones, the first stone axe, the first controlled fire, or the first cave painting. But some of the most profound secrets of our ancient ancestors are hidden in much smaller, more intimate places. To find the true origin of our right-handed world, we have to look past the bones of the arms and legs and peer into the mouths of those who lived millions of years ago. Our teeth are the hardest substance in our bodies, and because they survive the passage of time far better than soft tissue or even most skeletal remains, they have become an accidental diary of prehistoric behavior. This dental record has allowed scientists to trace a trail of handedness back nearly 2 million years, revealing that our preference for the right hand is not a modern cultural invention, but a deeply rooted biological legacy. To understand how a tooth can tell us which hand an ancestor preferred, we have to imagine the daily life of a hominin living on the African savanna or in a European cave. These individuals did not have the luxury of modern workstations, specialized clamps, or even a simple table. Instead, they used their bodies as multifunctional tools. One of the most common behaviors was using the mouth as a third hand. If a prehistoric hunter needed to process a tough animal hide, soften a piece of leather, or cut a large portion of meat into manageable bites, they would often grip one end of the material firmly between their front teeth. They would then pull the material tight with one hand and use a sharp-edged stone tool in the other hand to saw, scrape, or cut. In this high-stakes choreography of teeth and stone, accidents were inevitable. Every so often, the stone tool would slip and strike the front surface of the teeth. These tiny impacts left behind microscopic scratches on the enamel. In the scientific community, these are technically referred to as labial striations or labial scratches. Because the enamel is so durable, these scratches remained etched into the fossil record for hundreds of thousands and even millions of years. For anthropologists, these are not just signs of a clumsy moment, they are behavioral fossils. By analyzing the angle and direction of these scratches, researchers can determine with remarkable precision which hand was holding the stone tool and which hand was doing the pulling. The geometry of these scratches is surprisingly consistent. When a right-handed person holds a tool, they typically move it in a way that creates scratches slanting from the upper left side of the tooth toward the lower right. Conversely, a left-handed individual would produce a mirror image pattern with scratches slanting from the upper right to the lower left. To verify this, researchers have conducted vivid modern experiments where participants wore mouth guards and replicated these ancient butchery techniques. The researchers actually butchered meat using reconstructed stone tools to prove that a right-handed pull and cut motion creates a specific 45-degree angle scratch. The results confirmed that the direction of the scratches is a nearly foolproof indicator of which hand was dominant, as the angle is dictated by the natural arc of the arm's movement. The most stunning application of this technique took us back to a specific fossil found in the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. This find was an upper jawbone belonging to Homo habilis, a species often called the handyman, because of its association with the earliest stone toolkits. This individual lived approximately 1.8 million years ago. When scientists placed the teeth of this ancient ancestor under high-powered microscopes, they found a clear pattern of right-slanting labial striations. The scratches were most dominant on 4 specific teeth: the left and right central incisors, the right second incisor, and the right canine. This single jawbone represents the oldest unambiguous evidence of right-handedness in the human genus. It tells us that almost 2 million years ago, the physical foundations of our right-handed world were already being laid down. As we move forward through the timeline of the genus Homo, the evidence from prehistoric dental records only becomes more compelling. In the Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones in northern Spain, researchers have found a treasure trove of fossils belonging to Homo heidelbergensis, a species that lived about 500,000 years ago. Because this site contained the remains of many individuals, it allowed scientists to look at handedness not just in a single person, but at the population level. The findings at this site were a mirror of our modern world. When the striations on the teeth of these individuals were mapped, the researchers found the exact same 90/10 ratio that we see today. Roughly 90% of the group showed the characteristic right-handed scratch patterns, while only a small minority were left-handed. This proved that the extreme rightward bias of humanity wasn't a slow build that only reached its peak with modern Homo sapiens. Instead, it was a stabilized trait that had already reached its modern proportions 500,000 years ago. The trail continues with the Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives. A specific 130,000-year-old specimen from Krapina, Croatia, provided some of the clearest scratch patterns ever recorded. These fossils consistently show that Neanderthals were overwhelmingly right-handed. David Freyer, a lead researcher on this topic and a primary investigator of the Krapina finds, often highlights the human side of this research. Freyer provides a humorous anecdote about his own handedness. He was a forced right-hander whose parents made him switch from his natural left-handedness as a baby. He jokingly blames this early cultural pressure for his poor penmanship, but his personal history gives him a unique perspective on the biological persistence of the trait he studies in the fossil record. The Neanderthal evidence is particularly robust because their hand preference was so pronounced that it left marks not just on their teeth, but on their very skeletons. Neanderthal remains often show a significant asymmetry in the bones of their arms. Their right humerus, the upper arm bone, is frequently much thicker and more robust than the left. This wasn't just a result of genetics, it was a result of a lifetime of intense right-handed activity. Whether they were thrusting heavy spears during a hunt or scraping hides for clothing, they were leaning heavily on their dominant side, and their bones grew denser to support that extra force. This skeletal evidence is a perfect complement to the dental records. While it is rare to find a fossil with both arm bones perfectly preserved, a single tooth is often enough to tell the story of an individual's life. Together, these two lines of evidence paint a picture of a lineage that was becoming increasingly lopsided for the sake of efficiency. But why go to such lengths to study teeth when we have stone tools and cave art? The answer lies in the limitations of those other records. While we can look at a stone tool and try to guess which hand made it, those interpretations are often controversial. A right-handed person can make a tool that looks like it was made by a lefty, depending on the angle of the strike. Cave art, too, can be deceptive. A stenciled handprint on a cave wall shows us which hand was placed against the stone, but it doesn't always tell us which hand was the most skilled or dominant in daily life. While art provides evocative clues, the dental record offers a more habitual, undeniable record of physical reality. It is a direct result of a repeated daily physical action. It is an undeniable record of how that individual interacted with their world every single day. The mouth as a third hand behavior eventually began to disappear as our tools became more sophisticated and our lifestyles changed. As we developed better ways to secure materials and more specialized equipment for processing food and hides, the need to grip things with our teeth diminished. Yet, the lopsided brain that this behavior helped to create remains with us. The dental record shows us that by the time we stopped using our teeth as tools, the 90/10th split was already an unshakable part of our biological identity. We are the descendants of a long line of individuals who were physically and neurologically biased toward the right.
This realization shifts our perspective on the human story. We often think of our history as a series of intellectual breakthroughs, but the dental records remind us that it was also a story of physical habits and the way we used our bodies to survive. If our right-handedness was driven by the need for efficiency in work and communication, it raises a question about the other side of our history. While the dental records tell us about the peaceful labor of butchery and tool use, they also hint at a world where our ancestors had to compete and defend themselves. If the brain and the hands were specializing for the sake of efficiency, how did that specialization perform when the stakes were no longer about processing a hide, but about surviving a direct confrontation?
Chapter 4: The Shielded Heart and the Geometry of Survival. While the story of human-handedness is often told through the lens of craftsmanship and the quiet expansion of the brain, there is a darker and more visceral chapter to our evolutionary journey. This part of the story doesn't take place at a peaceful workbench. It takes place in the heat of conflict. For decades, a compelling theory known as the fighting hypothesis has suggested that the reason left-handedness persists in our species is tied directly to the surprise advantage it offers in a fight. Because 90% of the population is right-handed, a right-handed fighter almost always trains against and expects to face another right-handed opponent. When they suddenly find themselves staring down a left-handed rival, their expectations are shattered. The angles of attack are reversed, the defensive openings are in unexpected places, and that split second of confusion can be the difference between life and death. This theory of frequency-dependent selection explains why left-handers have never vanished. As long as they remain a rare minority, they retain that tactical edge of being unpredictable. We see this today in high-speed interactive sports like fencing, boxing, and tennis, where left-handers are statistically overrepresented at the elite levels. However, while this explains why the minority survives, it has historically struggled to explain the other side of the coin. Why did the majority become right-handed in the first place? If being a rare lefty is such a great advantage in a fight, why wouldn't the population eventually move toward a 50-50 split to neutralize that advantage? The answer lies in a lethal combination of human anatomy and the geometry of ancient weapons. To understand this, we have to look at the most vital organ in the human body, the heart. While we often think of the heart as being in the center of the chest, it is actually positioned asymmetrically. Approximately 3/4 of the heart's mass is situated in the left side of the chest, known as the left hemithorax. This makes the left side of the upper body a uniquely vulnerable target. In the deep past of our species, long before the invention of long-range firearms, combat was an intimate affair involving handheld, sharp-pointed weapons. For hundreds of thousands of years, the primary way humans settled lethal disputes was with stabbing tools, such as sharpened wooden spears or stone daggers. In this world of sharp force interaction, the hand you chose for a unilateral grip, holding a weapon with one hand, determined exactly how much of your heart you were exposing to your enemy. Imagine two ancient rivals facing each other. If a fighter holds a spear in their left hand, the biomechanics of their stance naturally rotates the left side of their chest forward toward the opponent to gain leverage and reach. In doing so, they are inadvertently leading with their heart and their aorta, the body's primary highway for blood. Severing either meant death in seconds. By leading with the left side, they place their most vulnerable organs directly in the path of an incoming strike. However, if that same fighter holds the spear in their right hand, the geometry of their body shifts.
The right-handed grip forces the right side of the body forward, while the left side, containing the bulk of the heart and the aorta, rotates away from the threat. By favoring the right hand for the weapon, the fighter is essentially using their own rib cage and the musculature of their right shoulder as a natural barrier. In this stance, the heart is shielded, tucked away on the far side of the body's midline. Furthermore, a right-handed fighter has their left arm free to deflect incoming strikes or hold a primitive shield, providing an additional layer of protection for the left side of the chest. This is the core of the modified fighting hypothesis. It suggests that right-handedness didn't just become dominant because it was better for making tools, but because it was safer for staying alive. This combat-driven pressure worked in tandem with the bipedalism and brain expansion explored in earlier chapters. If standing upright freed the hands and the growing brain provided the coordination, it was the lethal reality of violence that provided the final decisive filter. Right-handed fighters were more likely to walk away from a skirmish, live to see another day, and pass their traits and their right-handed bias on to the next generation.
The evidence for this lethal geometry is backed by startling data from modern forensic science. When researchers look at records of sharp force injuries in violent encounters, they find that the right side of a victim's upper body is stabbed roughly 2.4 times more often than the left. At first, this might seem to contradict the shielded heart theory, but it actually confirms the dominance of right-handed attackers. Because most attackers are right-handed, their natural arc of motion leads them to strike the side of the body directly opposite their dominant hand, the victim's left side. However, if the victim is also right-handed and standing in a defensive right-leading stance, they rotate that vulnerable left side away, forcing the attacker to reach across or strike the less lethal right side instead. Forensic data shows that stabs to the left upper body remain significantly more lethal, meaning the biological reality of the heart's position continues to dictate the outcomes of violence. This perspective also helps us understand why a sex difference in handedness exists. Across almost every population, men are more likely to be left-handed than women, with males ranging between 10.6 and 11.6%, while females fall between 8.6 and 9.5%. Historically, males have been the ones most frequently involved in high-stakes physical competition. In these scenarios, the surprise advantage of being left-handed provided a significant enough edge in winning fights to outweigh the defensive risks of heart exposure. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that allowed a small number of left-handed males to thrive, ensuring the trait remained in the gene pool even as the safer right-handed strategy claimed the majority. The role of the free hand in this lethal geometry cannot be overstated. Even before the invention of the formal shield, the left arm served as a parrying tool. By keeping the heart side arm free for defense, right-handed humans created a specialized division of labor for their limbs that matched the specialization of their brains. The right hand became the hand of action, while the left hand became the hand of the shield. This wasn't just a cultural choice, it was an anatomical necessity driven by the asymmetrical placement of our organs. As soon as humans began to standardize their equipment, they did so with the right-handed majority in mind, creating a world that was increasingly hostile to the left-handed minority. A fascinating study from Durham University provides a modern, tragic illustration of this cultural hostility. Researchers found that left-handed cricketers were nearly twice as likely to die in combat during the World Wars as their right-handed counterparts. The study theorized that these men struggled to shoot straight or react quickly with the standard-issue Lee-Enfield .303 rifle, a weapon designed exclusively for right-handed bolt action and eye alignment. In the high-stakes environment of a trench or a battlefield, the mismatch between a left-hander's biology and a right-handed tool was often fatal. This focus on combat also provides a unique explanation for why humans are so much more lopsided than other primates. Unlike our chimpanzee and bonobo cousins, who maintain a 50-50 split because they lack specialized stabbing weapons, humans became the masters of the pointy stick. As soon as our ancestors began to rely on tools that could kill from a distance of a few feet, the geometry of the body became the most important factor in survival. The moment the first hominin sharpened a branch and held it in their right hand to protect their heart, they set the course for the next 2 million years of human behavior. While the scratches on ancient teeth show us that our ancestors were right-handed, the geometry of combat tells us why. Those ancestors weren't just right-handed because it was easier to scrape a hide. They were right-handed because the world they lived in was a place where one wrong stance could be fatal. The right-handed majority isn't just a quirk of our biology. It is a legacy of the lethal geometry that our ancestors had to navigate every day. Yet, even with this explanation for the majority, the mystery of the minority remains. If the right-handed stance is truly the safer way to live, why does the 10% minority persist with such incredible resilience? To find that answer, we have to look at the left-handed minority not as a mistake, but as a deliberate and successful evolutionary alternative. We have to understand how the rebel strategy of being left-handed has allowed this minority to not just survive, but to thrive in a world that was built against them. What is it about the left-handed brain that makes it such a persistent and successful part of the human story?
Chapter 5: The Rebel Strategy and the Biological Wildcard. Throughout our exploration of human handedness, we have focused heavily on the overwhelming dominance of the right hand. We have seen how it is tethered to the very foundations of what makes us human: our upright gait, our massive brains, and our complex tools. But this focus on the majority leaves a final, persistent question. If the evolutionary pressures toward right-handedness were so powerful and so ancient, why does the left-handed minority still exist at all? In a world that has been physically and socially biased against them for at least 2 million years, why hasn't natural selection simply smoothed out this 10% wrinkle in our species? The answer lies in the realization that left-handedness is not an evolutionary mistake or a developmental error. Instead, it is a highly successful, resilient, and strategically vital rebel strategy that has survived precisely because it is rare. To understand the survival of the lefty, we must look at the concept of frequency-dependent selection. This is a biological principle where the value of a trait depends on how common it is in the population. In many scenarios, being part of the majority is the safest bet, but in certain high-stakes interactions, there is a massive premium on being different. While we have previously explored how this manifests as a tactical advantage in combat, the persistence of the trait suggests a deeper biological mechanism at play, a biological wildcard that prevents the human species from becoming a total monolith.
Recent breakthroughs in genetics have finally begun to reveal the specific machinery behind this wildcard. For decades, the search for a single left-handed gene proved fruitless, but modern research has identified a much more sophisticated culprit: tubulin genes. These genes are responsible for the internal scaffolding of our cells, known as microtubulins. These microscopic structures are the skeleton of the cell, and they play a crucial role in the very early development of the brain's symmetry. These tubulin variants don't just flip a switch for handedness. They influence the subtle twisting and orientation of cells during the earliest stages of life. This suggests that being left-handed is a fundamental, structural variation that begins at the cellular level, long before a fetus has even formed a hand. Even more startling is the discovery that handedness may not even begin in the brain. For a long time, we assumed the brain's motor cortex made the decision and sent the signal down. However, recent studies of gene expression in the womb have shown that handedness is likely determined in the spinal cord. As early as the 8th week of development, there are clear asymmetrical patterns of gene activity in the spinal segments that control the arms and legs. Crucially, this happens before the motor cortex is even functionally connected to the spinal cord. This means that the rebel strategy is hardwired into the very trunk of our nervous system before the brain has a chance to weigh in. It is a bottom-up biological imperative, not a top-down choice. This biological depth is reflected in the diverse neurological profiles of left-handers. Rather than being simple mirror images of right-handers, left-handers fall into distinct categories that researchers call standard, crowded, and reversed profiles. The standard profile is the right-handed majority with language in the left hemisphere. The crowded profile includes left-handers who still process language in the left hemisphere, potentially leading to a more crowded and interconnected neural landscape. But it is the reversed profile, those who are left-handed and process language in the right hemisphere, that is the rarest and most intriguing. This profile is strongly linked to the neurodiversity we see in the human population, offering a different way of organizing cognitive resources. This lack of strict specialization may explain why left-handers often show an edge in specific cognitive tasks, such as musical memory, where the ability to integrate complex patterns across both sides of the brain is a distinct advantage. The persistence of this minority is not just a human story. It is a broader biological theme. When we look at the animal kingdom, we find that the decision to favor one side is often linked to environmental and even sexual factors. In cats and dogs, for instance, limb preference is frequently sex-linked. Males are predominantly left-pawed, while females tend to be right-pawed. In the world of zebrafish, asymmetry is written into the very center of the brain, specifically in the habularia nuclei, which helps the fish navigate its environment. Even birds show us how the environment can trigger these wild cards. In chicks and pigeons, eye preference is determined by how the embryo sits in the egg. Because the chick's head is turned, one eye is pressed against its body, while the other is exposed to light through the shell. This simple exposure to light triggers the development of asymmetrical visual processing, a reminder that biology often uses external cues to break symmetry and create specialized individuals. For the human lefty, however, this biological specialization has had to survive a long and often brutal history of social stigma. While we are familiar with the general bias toward the right, the specific roots of this stigma are often tied to the practicalities of ancient life. In many religious and cultural contexts, particularly within Islam and early Christianity, the division of labor between the hands was a matter of public health and social etiquette. The right hand was reserved for clean public acts, greeting others, eating, and performing sacred rituals. The left hand was relegated to unclean private tasks, specifically personal hygiene. To use the left hand for a social interaction was not just a faux pas, it was a violation of the communal order. This led to the heartbreaking practice of retraining left-handed children, where their dominant hands were tied behind their backs or punished, an attempt to force a biological rebel into a standardized mold. Yet, this narrative of evil was not universal. In a necessary counterbalance to the Western stigma, other great civilizations viewed the left-handed minority with reverence. The Inca, for example, believed that left-handers, or lioque, possessed unique spiritual powers and were capable of healing. Among the Zuni people of the American Southwest, left-handedness was seen as a sign of good luck and a mark of a person who could bring a different, necessary perspective to the tribe. These cultures recognized what modern science is only now beginning to quantify, that a population is stronger when it contains individuals who see and interact with the world from a different angle. This resilience suggests that being a lefty isn't just a quirk. It is a fundamental part of the human blueprint that has been historically misunderstood. For decades, left-handers were actually excluded from scientific research. Because their brains were more variable and less lopsided than the majority, researchers viewed them as noise that would ruin the clean data of their studies. If you were left-handed, you were often disqualified from participating in brain imaging research. This created a massive blind spot in our understanding of human neuroscience. We built a map of the human brain that was actually just a map of the right-handed brain. Fortunately, this is changing. Modern neuroscientists are realizing that by studying the left-handed brain, they are looking at the most plastic and adaptable version of human neural architecture. Because left-handers live in a world designed for the other 90%, they are in a state of constant environmental adaptation. They must navigate right-handed scissors, desks, and tools, a process that may actually make their brains more resilient and better at creative problem-solving. They are the tactical wildcards of our species, the thinkers who connect seemingly unrelated ideas, and the survivors who have endured centuries of pressure to conform. The persistence of the 90-10th split is a reminder that evolution does not always seek a single perfect solution. Often, the best strategy for a species is to maintain a balance, to have a majority that provides stability and a minority that provides innovation and unpredictability. The right-handed majority and the left-handed minority are two sides of the same evolutionary coin, each playing a vital role in the success of our species.
As we look toward the future, we must ask ourselves what other hidden asymmetries are waiting to be discovered. We have seen how handedness is linked to the spinal cord, to cellular scaffolding, and to the very way we process music and memory. But as our world becomes increasingly digital and our physical interactions with tools change, will the biological rebel strategy continue to hold its 10% ground? Or are we moving toward a new kind of cognitive symmetry that we have yet to understand? The story of our lopsidedness is far from over. It is a living record of our past and a mysterious map of our future.
The 90-10th split is more than a quirk. It is a biological legacy millions of years in the making. From the moment our ancestors stood upright and their brains expanded, the scales tipped toward a right-handed world. This lopsidedness, etched into ancient teeth and forged in the geometry of survival, facilitated the rapid transmission of culture and technology. Yet, the persistent left-handed minority reminds us that evolution favors balance over total uniformity, maintaining a rebel strategy for innovation and tactical advantage. Our hands are not just tools. They are a physical map of the neurological shifts that defined our species. As we move into a digital future, we carry this ancient blueprint with us, a testament to a lineage shaped by both stability and surprise. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the evolution of the human hand.